So when you first create a new Vue application using the Vue CLI like we just did, it can be quite daunting because it generates all of these different files and folders for us to make up this project. And you start thinking that using the Vue CLI was a bad mistake because it just seems way too complicated. But fear not, although it can seem complicated at first and there's a lot of files, once you start working with it and making more Vue applications, it becomes a lot less scary. So I'm just going to give you a quick walkthrough of what these files are all about, but don't worry if it doesn't sink in at first. The more we use these files, the easier it will become. So first off, the node modules folder at the top. This is where any libraries or dependencies that we use for this project are stored. In our case, the Vue library and the things it depends on are all kept in here. And anytime we install another package or library for this project, it's going to be placed in here. Now, you don't need to go in here or edit anything inside here. Now, the public folder contains the index.html file, which is sent to the browser initially. Now, this is the single page that makes up a single page application. And if we take a look inside, we can see there's virtually no content in the body. We have this empty div with an ID of app. And this is ultimately where Vue will dynamically inject component templates. Okay? Now, next up is the source folder. And it's inside the source folder that we write all of our source code. All of our different components, templates, and CSS are going to live inside here. Also in this source folder, we have this main.js file, and this is the JavaScript file that kickstarts our application. And it does that by using this create app method. Now, we also saw this method in the last chapter, but when we used it, we had to say vue.createApp. We're not doing that right here. And the reason we're not doing that is because we're directly importing this function from the Vue library. So the way this works is that we're just importing the things that we need from Vue, and then we don't have to say vue dot. It's the same kind of thing, but this import is grabbing this single function now from the Vue library, and the import automatically knows to look inside the node modules for that Vue library. So it grabs it from there and it grabs this function which we use. So we're doing the same thing, we just don't tack it onto the Vue object anymore. Now inside we're passing this app object, and this is a Vue component. Now before we directly added in a component using an object, and we added things like data and methods into that object. Now this is a very similar kind of thing, but this time we're not directly doing it here. Instead, we're importing a component from a Vue file. Now Vue files are known as single file components in Vue, and that's generally how we create Vue components when we work with larger projects. So now we're saying that this is the root component, which is then mounted to the DOM at this location, which is the div with an ID of app. And we can take a look at that again inside index. It's right here. So this is where the root component is going to be injected. So let's just take a little look at that app.vue file. And it looks something like this. We can see three things. It's got a template, it's got a script, and inside we have an object being exported, and this is very similar to the object that we created inside Create App in previous lessons. We'll see more about that later on, but also at the bottom we have a style as well. And every Vue component or Vue file is made up of these three things, but don't worry too much about all of this for now. We'll talk more about Vue components and Vue files in the next lesson, but know that this is our root component that we're registering right here, okay? Below the source folder, we've also got a few more files. First, we have a gitignore file, and that is set up for if you want to use Git and GitHub in this project. There's also a Babel config file, which is configuration for our app so that we can use certain JavaScript features. And finally, we have packages files as well. Now, you won't need to manually edit any of those. They keep track of our different packages. You will find yourself referring to this one quite frequently though, package.json, because this will contain all of our dependencies, which we'll probably talk about a bit more later on, but it also contains the scripts to serve and build our application. So we're going to use this one now, in fact, and this is used to spin up a local development server so that we can preview our Vue application in a browser. So let me do that. The first thing we need to do is open up a terminal, and to do that you can go to Terminal and New Terminal, and down here make sure you're in the correct directory. It should be modal project or whatever you call your project, and then let's run this script. The way we run it is by using npm. So we say npm run and then whatever the script is called. In our case it's called serve. So let's do that. npm run serve, press enter. This spins up the local development server, and when it's done it's going to give us a link right here where it says local to open this in a browser. So I'm just going to control and click to open that in a browser, and it's appeared on my other screen over here. And now we can see this is our Vue application, and this right here, this content is what we saw in the app.vue file. And all of the templates in that file is being dynamically injected into the index page, which we get back. So if we inspect this, we should see it's all inside this div with an ID of app. That's where it's being output. So remember, when this HTML page is first sent to the browser from our local development server, this HTML page is empty for a split second. It just contains this empty div with an ID of app. But then Vue takes the app component and it renders it to the DOM inside this div element with the ID of app. Now I can demo this by adding a breakpoint in the JavaScript. So let me open up the sources, and I'm going to go to JS over here, and I'm going to go to app.js, and I'm going to scroll right to the top, and I'm going to add a breakpoint, meaning that the JavaScript now is going to stop here and it's not going to run. And if I refresh the page, when we get back you can see it's an empty screen, and if I go to elements we can see there's no content inside the div with an ID of app. This is the blank HTML page we get back, but then if we were to run the JavaScript, then everything is going to work and it's going to inject that component. Alright, so that's how it's working. Now all of this is happening behind the scenes by Vue, and all we really need to do is focus on creating components which we then want to render to the DOM. Okay, so hopefully now you've got a basic understanding of what these files are for and how Vue is injecting a component into the web page. Don't worry too much if it seems a bit complicated for now. The more we use these files as we go on, the more it will make sense, and you can always refer back to this video for reference. Next up though, we'll take a closer look at what this Vue file is and how we use it to create a Vue component. So this thing right here.